Growing up, I always felt like I was in the shadow of my younger sister, Ellie. From the moment she was born, everything seemed to change. I was 8 years old, an only child who had the undivided attention of my parents. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was comfortable. Mom would help me with homework, Dad would take me fishing on the weekends, and we were a family, simple and steady. But all of that changed the night Ellie came into the world. I remember it vividly. My Aunt Julie knocked on my bedroom door at 2 a.m. and told me to pack a suitcase. Mom had gone into labor early, and Ellie was being rushed to the hospital. I was confused. Ellie wasn't due for another 2 months. In the coming days, I would hear hushed conversations between Mom and Dad, and visits to the hospital became part of our routine. Ellie was tiny, fragile, and connected to machines that I couldn't understand. I wasn't allowed to get too close to her, and it felt like there was an invisible wall forming between me and my family. When Ellie was finally brought home, things were never the same. Our house transformed into a sterile bubble. My mom, already a meticulous cleaner, became obsessed with germs. Industrial-strength disinfectants and hand sanitizer stations appeared in every room. I'll never forget the sharp smell of bleach that seemed to hang in the air, and it still makes me uneasy. But the hardest part was that any time I showed the slightest sign of illness, I was whisked away to Grandma Lily's house or Aunt Rachel's. A sneeze, a cough, even the sniffle of a cold would send me away like I was a threat. At first, I thought it was an adventure. Grandma Lily made the best cookies, and Aunt Rachel's house had endless shelves of books. But soon I realized the truth. I wasn't being sent away for a break. I was being sent away to keep me from hurting Ellie. As the years went on, I found myself trying to gain attention in any way I could. I tried to be the perfect child, straight A's, awards and science fairs and so on, but it felt like my efforts were invisible. Every time I achieved something, it was Ellie who got the praise. She was constantly sick, or so it seemed. If she had a headache, she stayed home from school. If she felt tired, she would get a break from anything that required effort. Meanwhile, I was expected to perform at the top of my game, but no one seemed to notice. When I was 12, I spent months learning to play Bridge Over Troubled Water on the piano for the school talent show. But on the night of the performance, Ellie got a fever and I had no one in the audience. 2 weeks later, the entire family attended Ellie's flute recital, even though she could barely play. It was in that moment that I realized Ellie had learned to use the family's dynamic to her advantage. She had outgrown most of her health issues by the time she was 7, but she still found ways to avoid responsibility. It wasn't just that Ellie got special treatment, it was how everyone, including my parents, justified it. Ellie needs more attention because she had such a rough start, they'd say. Sophie's always been independent. She doesn't need us as much. I didn't understand at the time why being healthy made me less deserving of love or attention. But I learned quickly. My parents didn't need to tell me I was invisible. I could feel it in every room I walked into. They were so focused on Ellie's needs that they overlooked me entirely. But even as I absorbed the emotional distance from my family, I began to find a way to cope. I buried myself in books, particularly about art and antiques. It became my sanctuary, the only place where I felt I could thrive, even if no one else was watching. I spent hours at Grandma Lily's house, organizing her collection of vintage jewelry. I learned to catalog each piece with precision and care. It wasn't just about the jewelry, it was about finding something I could call my own. Something that wasn't defined by Ellie's health or my parents' expectations. I had always been overlooked, but now I had something valuable to focus on, a skill that would eventually set me apart. As high school approached, I found a new sense of determination. Ellie continued to get the spotlight, with her long list of doctor's appointments and the ongoing drama of her sick days. But I realized that if I was ever going to escape this life of being invisible, I had to make my own way. I joined clubs, volunteered, and excelled academically, always knowing that no one was going to do it for me. My parents weren't paying attention. My sister wasn't interested in my successes. But that didn't stop me. I was going to be someone even if I had to do it all on my own. By the time I reached my senior year of high school, I had become an expert at flying under the radar. I was the president of the National Honor Society and editor-in-chief of the school newspaper. I took every opportunity to prove to myself that I could be more than just Ellie's sister. The turning point came when I scored a perfect 1600 on my SATs. My parents barely reacted when I told them. My mom was too busy helping Ellie with her homework to even acknowledge my achievement. I didn't expect much, but part of me was still hurt. At this point, I was determined to leave home. I knew I had to get away from the constant comparisons and neglect. College was my escape, and I applied to 15 schools without telling anyone. Each acceptance letter was a small victory, a personal reminder that I could succeed on my own terms. My scholarship to the University of Michigan was the key to my freedom. But as excited as I was to leave, I knew that my journey was only beginning. Little did I know, my true breakthrough was waiting for me beyond the campus walls. The transition to college felt like stepping into a whole new world, one that wasn't defined by my family's expectations or Ellie's constant need for attention. For the first time, I felt truly free. The University of Michigan, with its sprawling campus and endless opportunities, was everything I had dreamed of. The pressure of being the perfect child was gone, replaced by the chance to build something for myself. However, even in this new chapter, my family remained a presence in the background, lingering over my achievements, or rather, the lack of recognition for them. While I thrived in my newfound independence, I couldn't ignore the constant comparisons from my family. Ellie, as usual, was the golden child. She transferred from one college to another, never staying long enough to make an impact, yet always finding ways to take the spotlight. My parents, always so caught up in Ellie's needs, barely noticed my accomplishments. I was no longer the disappointment, but their indifference to my hard work was a constant reminder of the years I had spent feeling invisible. At the same time, I began working at a local diner to support myself. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The owner, Carol, became one of the few people in my life who truly acknowledged my worth. She remembered my birthday when my parents forgot, and her advice about how to recognize genuine people in a world full of fakes stayed with me. Carol wasn't just a boss, she was a mentor in her own quiet way, teaching me more about resilience and independence than I had learned in all my years of academic achievement. At the diner, I learned how to navigate life outside the bubble of my family's expectations. It wasn't the high life, but it was honest work, and for once, it felt like I was doing something purely for myself. In my first few years at college, I had to juggle long shifts at the diner with my coursework. There were nights I stayed up late studying or doing research for papers, but I never complained. This was my shot at making a life for myself, one where I was in control. I immersed myself in my studies and threw myself into every opportunity one could find. I joined clubs, worked on projects, and built relationships with people who saw me as more than just Ellie's sister. I made sure to excel in everything I did, from the debate team to leading school events, all while maintaining a job to pay my rent and bills. It was also during this time that I rediscovered my love for vintage jewelry. After years of cataloging Grandma Lily's collection, I started taking a deeper interest in the art of authentication. I took a few courses in my free time and began learning about jewelry history, styles, and the intricacies of identifying authentic pieces. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a skill I could turn into something bigger. I never expected it to lead to a career, but as the years went by, it became clear that this was a path I could truly excel in. By the time I graduated, I had built a strong foundation in jewelry authentication, even working part-time at an auction house in Detroit. My first few months there were standard, documenting antiques, organizing estate sales, and cataloging vintage pieces. It wasn't glamorous work, but I learned a lot about the world of high-end antiques and the importance of authenticity. One day, while cataloging a large estate collection, I stumbled upon a piece of jewelry that seemed too exquisite to be just costume jewelry. It was an Art Deco brooch. Something about its craftsmanship stood out. Most people at the auction house dismissed it, but I couldn't let it go. I spent my lunch breaks researching it and, to my surprise, found that it was indeed a rare, authentic piece worth far more than I had imagined. With this discovery, my career took an unexpected turn. My boss, Mr. Harrison, who had initially dismissed my findings, was impressed when the brooch sold for $47,000 at auction. This was my first big break, and it opened the door to more opportunities. I became known for my ability to spot valuable pieces that others had overlooked. I started getting more trust and responsibility at work, and before I knew it, I was handling some of the most sought-after collections in the industry. It wasn't long before I realized that this was something I could build a career out of, something I could do on my own. Still, I kept my achievements a secret from my family. My parents continued to think I worked at an antique shop, unaware of the fact that I was already making significant strides in my field. It was almost like living a double life. I would attend Sunday dinners, sitting there in my modest clothes while my parents fawned over Ellie's latest drama. Ellie, of course, never seemed to notice or care about my work. Her world revolved around her own problems, her minor achievements, and her need for constant attention. I had become so accustomed to this dynamic that I no longer sought validation from them. Then one day everything changed. I had just closed a significant deal, authenticating a rare Tiffany piece, and was feeling on top of the world. But when I arrived at my parents' house for dinner, they barely acknowledged my success. Ellie, as usual, had all the attention. It was a moment of realization for me. I had spent years being overlooked, and yet, despite all of my accomplishments, nothing had really changed. My family still saw me as the quiet, invisible one. This was the turning point for me. I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadows of my family's favoritism and expectations. It was time to stop pretending and start living authentically. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself to people who would never truly see me. But now, I had a skill that could take me further than I had ever imagined. It was time to step into the world I had created for myself and make it known. Little did I know this decision would change everything. By the time I graduated from the University of Michigan, I was ready to leave behind the shadows of my past. I had spent my years there working hard, not just academically but emotionally, shedding the layers of neglect and indifference that had defined my childhood. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. I had built a life for myself that was independent, meaningful, and mine. The diploma I received wasn't just a symbol of academic success. It was a testament to my resilience, my perseverance, and my ability to take control of my own destiny. The journey was far from easy. I had worked long hours at the diner to make ends meet, often sacrificing sleep and social time. But in the quiet hours of the night, as I sorted through old jewelry at the auction house or reviewed pieces for authentication, I realized that I was building something much greater than I had ever imagined. It wasn't just a job, it was my future. And though my family still couldn't see it, I had found my path. Jewelry authentication wasn't just a career, it was a passion. It was the one thing that connected me to my past, to Grandma Lily's collection, and to a legacy of craftsmanship that I now felt honored to be a part of. At first, working at the auction house felt like just another stepping stone, a way to gain experience in the industry. I started by cataloging estate sales and organizing collections. But the more I worked with these pieces, the more I realized that my ability to see value where others didn't was a rare gift. It was the attention to detail, the ability to trace a piece's history, and the relentless pursuit of authenticity that set me apart from others in the field. And as I honed these skills, I began to build a reputation. I discovered rare, valuable pieces that had been overlooked by my colleagues. A brooch that no one else saw as special sold for $47,000 at auction, and suddenly, I was the person everyone at the auction house turned to when they needed expert advice. Yet, despite my growing success, I kept it all hidden from my family. I knew they would never truly understand the significance of what I was doing. I had spent so many years living in Ellie's shadow, trying to prove myself worthy of their attention, that I didn't feel the need to share my accomplishments with them. My parents, still obsessed with Ellie's drama and her perpetual need for attention, couldn't see beyond their own biases. Ellie, as usual, was the golden child, the one who needed everything, and my accomplishments were nothing more than a quiet whisper in a room full of their loud, self-absorbed chatter. Still, I kept pushing forward. My work at the auction house led to more freelance opportunities. As my expertise in jewelry authentication grew, I began to take on small projects on the side. I started receiving calls from private collectors and estate lawyers who needed advice on inherited jewelry. I was building a network of high-end clients who appreciated the value I brought to their collections. And slowly, I began to realize that this was something I could truly make my own. One night, as I sat in my small apartment surrounded by stacks of books, printouts, and jewelry catalogs, it hit me: I could start my own business. I could build a jewelry authentication firm that offered the same level of expertise and attention to detail that had earned me respect in the industry. But the thought was daunting. How could I possibly take this leap? I had no money to invest, no clients lined up, and no guarantee that I would succeed. But I had something else: the lessons of resilience that I had learned growing up. I had been overlooked, ignored, and treated as if I didn't matter, but I had never given up. I had built my success from the ground up, and I wasn't about to let fear or doubt hold me back. So I made the decision. I emptied my savings account, took out a loan against my car, and rented a small office in a less-than-ideal part of town. The space was small, barely big enough to fit a desk and a few chairs, and it smelled like the Chinese restaurant downstairs. But it was mine. The first few months were incredibly challenging. I worked tirelessly, often waking up at 4 a.m. with cold sweats, worrying about how long my savings would last. But slowly word began to spread. I took on small projects for local antique dealers, offering my authentication services at a lower rate than the big firms. My attention to detail became known, and soon I was receiving calls from high-end collectors who were willing to pay a premium for my expertise. The small office, once a symbol of my struggle, became a beacon of my success. I hired my first employee, Jenny, a brilliant gemology graduate who reminded me of myself when I was starting out, quiet, intelligent, but overlooked. Together, we began to build a team of specialists, and our reputation for discovering rare, historically significant jewelry grew. Clients began to trust us with their most valuable pieces, and our business expanded rapidly. In less than 2 years, I had opened new offices in Detroit, Chicago, and New York. The firm was doing better than I could have imagined, and I was finally free from the constraints of my family's expectations. But as my business grew, so did the pressure to keep it a secret from my family. I had always been Sarah, the antique shop worker, in their eyes, and I knew that revealing the truth would shake the foundation of the false narratives they had created about me. Every Sunday dinner felt like a performance, with me playing the role of the humble, struggling daughter while Ellie basked in the glow of her own self-made drama. I wore my modest clothes and kept my success hidden, playing the part of the disappointed child, all the while building an empire on the side. The truth, however, was becoming too hard to conceal. The more successful I became, the more I knew that I couldn't keep pretending. I had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, and built something that was entirely my own. It was time for the world, and especially my family, to know the truth. And soon, that moment would come, when the family dinner table would no longer be big enough to contain the secret I had kept for so long. The Thanksgiving that changed everything began just like any other, only this time I couldn't hide the truth anymore. Over the years, I had silently endured my family's dismissive attitude toward me and my achievements. They had built their entire world around Ellie, her needs, her struggles, her triumphs, and I was left to quietly exist in the shadows. Even when I had made remarkable strides in my career, they didn't care. The constant comparison, the disregard for my hard work, and the endless favoritism towards Ellie had become so ingrained that it was almost suffocating. By then, I had built a successful business, a multi-million-dollar jewelry authentication firm with offices in Detroit, Chicago, and New York. I was no longer the girl who had to hide her potential to make others feel better about themselves. I had worked tirelessly to establish myself in an industry I was passionate about. My clients were the elite, my work was highly regarded, and I had earned every bit of success on my own. But my family, my parents and Ellie, had no idea. To them, I was still the little antique shop worker, always in the background, just waiting for the next mistake to be made so they could ignore my achievements and center Ellie's life once more. That Thanksgiving, things were different. It had all started innocuously enough. Mom had called me a couple of weeks before to ask if I would handle the dinner this year. She had hurt her back and was overwhelmed by the thought of preparing the meal for 20 guests. At first, I thought I'd offer to help out of genuine goodwill, but a part of me was growing tired of the constant charade I had to put on for my family. I knew how much they despised my success, so I wasn't exactly eager to step in and act like the perfect daughter again. Still, I decided to go along with it. I didn't offer to cook the dinner myself. Instead, I had it catered from a high-end firm that I trusted for business gatherings. The meal would be far more exquisite than any of them expected, and it would cost more than they ever imagined I earned in 2 months. But I didn't care anymore. For once, I was doing something for myself, something beyond their expectations or judgment. I coordinated everything, had the meal delivered, and told them not to worry about the cost. But of course, Mom had to ask the inevitable question, "Are you taking out a loan for this?" I laughed it off, but in reality I had saved up enough to afford it, and the truth was far more complicated than they could ever know. Thanksgiving morning arrived and I was feeling surprisingly calm. I sat with my laptop, monitoring an auction for a magnificent Art Nouveau necklace that I hoped would sell for a client. As the family slowly trickled in, the usual banter filled the air. Rachel, always the center of attention, was making sarcastic remarks about how I was spending my time while she focused on her trivial worries. I had long ago stopped caring about her digs. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that the moment of truth was approaching. Dinner was served, and the lavish spread arrived on schedule, perfectly prepared and nothing like the dry, overcooked turkey I had become accustomed to. As my family tucked into the gourmet meal, Rachel began her usual routine of making critical remarks. She complained about the store-bought stuffing and tried to downplay everything I did. I didn't let it get to me. I knew how it would go. Eventually, she would take the opportunity to ridicule me, and I would be left to hide my emotions once more. But this time, I wasn't in the mood to play along. While the others were enjoying their meal, I stepped away to check the progress of the online auction. What happened next was nothing short of chaos. As I left my laptop running on the table in my childhood bedroom, Rachel entered without knocking, as she always did. It had become second nature for her to invade my space, rummage through my things, and take whatever she needed without asking. She saw the laptop screen, filled with accounts and contracts I was monitoring, and decided it was the perfect time to expose me. She grabbed my laptop with a smug grin, clearly thinking she would somehow embarrass me in front of the entire family. Her intention was clear: expose Sarah for being the insignificant antique worker she thought I was. She thought my life was insignificant, that my work was trivial. But when she flipped the laptop around, the room fell silent. What Rachel didn't know was that I had been hiding my success for years. What she had assumed was an antique shop was actually one of the largest jewelry authentication companies in the country. The screen displayed account balances, $12.4 million in total, and pending contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. My business was thriving, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the underdog. I had achieved everything I ever wanted and more. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see Rachel's face shift from smug confidence to disbelief. She couldn't comprehend it. The way she stammered, she's rich, only deepened the awkwardness of the moment. And that's when my mother, who had always dismissed me, began to laugh. She actually thought it was some kind of joke. But when she realized it wasn't, her laughter turned into something much darker. Her face flushed red, her voice trembled with anger as she confronted me. "You have millions and you let us struggle?" The accusations came flooding in from all sides. My parents couldn't believe I had been hiding my wealth from them all these years. They felt betrayed because I hadn't shared it with them. Ellie, of course, played the victim card, sobbing and demanding to know why I hadn't told her about my success. My dad joined in, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. The years of being ignored, the years of being considered unworthy, all boiled over. I was no longer the quiet daughter who lived in the shadows. I had built my life on my own terms, and they couldn't handle it. In that moment I snapped. Years of neglect and disregard poured out in a single, explosive response. "You raised me to believe I didn't matter," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You missed every milestone, every achievement because Ellie's feelings might be hurt. You never saved a penny for my college but took out loans for her private school. Now you're angry because I built something for myself?" And with that, the chaotic Thanksgiving dinner reached its boiling point. The days after Thanksgiving felt like a slow-motion disaster unfolding. After the scene at the dinner table, everything shifted. The calm I had felt earlier in the morning had evaporated. As I left the dinner, leaving behind the chaos that my family had sparked, I knew things would never be the same. The whirlwind of texts and phone calls that bombarded my phone in the hours that followed was a surreal reflection of how my family had turned on me. It was as if the truth had cracked open a dam of frustration, envy, and entitlement, and suddenly everyone felt entitled to something they hadn't earned. I left the house that night, feeling a mixture of anger, relief, and a sense of liberation. It wasn't just the explosion that had been building for years. It was the overwhelming realization that I had been living under the illusion that I had to prove myself to these people. They had only ever seen me as the second child, the one who didn't matter, who wasn't as important as Ellie. But now that they saw the truth of my success, they believed they had the right to claim it too. The hypocrisy of it all was maddening. Despite my years of helping them, of sending monthly transfers to keep them afloat, they acted as if they had been wronged by me. They had no appreciation for the sacrifices I made to support them, but the moment they saw my wealth, all that mattered was their own self-interest. Ellie, in particular, was furious. Her social media posts started flooding Facebook and Instagram within hours. She played the role of the hurt, abandoned sister, claiming that I had kept my wealth hidden from the family and was now hoarding it selfishly. It felt like betrayal. She twisted the narrative in such a way that she turned my success into her victimhood, telling everyone how I had failed to share my good fortune. The comments section on her posts was an unrelenting tide of support for her. People who barely knew me, old acquaintances, distant cousins, began to weigh in on how greedy I was, how I should share my wealth with the family who had supported me. It stung, but what hurt even more was realizing that they had never really seen me. They had never cared enough to ask about my struggles or my accomplishments. But it didn't stop there. My family didn't just sit back and let the storm pass. The harassment continued for days. I received dozens of calls, messages, and voicemails. My parents, who had never been invested in my success, suddenly wanted to have adult conversations about money. Mom insisted that I was obligated to help them more, now that I had all this wealth. Dad, with his constant claims of how they had sacrificed for me, began demanding I set up trust funds for everyone. The audacity to think they had the right to demand money from me, after years of neglecting me, was infuriating. But it didn't end there. Ellie was relentless, posting passive-aggressive updates about family betrayal, about how her own suffering was now magnified by my newfound wealth. She claimed she had always tried to help me, pointing to the advice she gave me when I was struggling to build my business. But looking back, her advice was never anything more than hollow platitudes, meant to make herself feel better about her lack of ambition. She had spent years undermining my accomplishments, but now she saw my success as something to exploit. Then came the real kicker, when they showed up at my office. I walked into work one Monday morning to find my parents and Ellie sitting in the reception area, waiting for an appointment. I had to hold back a laugh as I realized what they had come for. They thought they could simply waltz in and get a piece of my hard-earned success. Ellie, wearing her fake designer bag and throwing sarcastic comments at my receptionist, thought she was entitled to something just because she had been there for me, yet she had never actually cared about me. It was clear what they wanted. Mom demanded that I set up trust funds for everyone, and Ellie casually mentioned she needed $2 million to start her new life. They thought they could simply ask and I would comply. I looked at them and realized how much I had tolerated. How much I had sacrificed for their approval, for their affection, when all they had done was take from me without ever truly giving back. The situation escalated quickly. I tried to keep my composure, but I had reached my limit. I was done. I had spent years pretending to be the daughter who would always be there, always sacrificing my own well-being for their happiness. But that Thanksgiving had been the breaking point. I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't going to be the invisible child, the one who was always overlooked. So, I did what I had to do. I took out my phone and canceled the monthly transfers to their account. They were stunned, absolutely silent for a moment. And then Mom, in her typical fashion, gasped like I had physically slapped her. Ellie, sensing she couldn't manipulate the situation anymore, began her fake crying routine, but when she saw it wasn't working, she quickly stopped. It didn't stop there though. My family refused to leave my office and I had to call security. It felt surreal watching my own mother being dragged out of my office, yelling at me about how ungrateful I was. They had never respected me and now they were showing their true colors. After they left, my phone was bombarded with messages again. They didn't stop. It was as if they were trying to break me down, to force me into giving them what they thought they deserved. The harassment didn't end after that. For weeks, they tried to contact me, through fake numbers, fake emails, and even through my company's customer service line. It was as if they couldn't accept that I was no longer going to be their doormat. I had to involve my lawyer and issue a formal notice. Things got worse, but for the first time in my life I didn't feel like I was in the wrong. And then, finally, there was Grandma Marie. When Mom called her, I was expecting her to take sides with my family as she had in the past. But she didn't. She told Mom that it was about time someone in the family had succeeded on their own terms. For the first time, someone in my family understood that my success wasn't about them, it was about me. I didn't hear from my parents again for months. Ellie continued her passive-aggressive rants on social media, trying to guilt-trip me into giving in. But I didn't care anymore. I had finally done something for myself. I had found my voice and I was no longer going to let them dictate how my life should be. Months had passed since the explosive Thanksgiving dinner that irrevocably changed the dynamics of my relationship with my family. The fallout was far-reaching. I had expected some kind of remorse or understanding from them after the way I had been treated, but instead, I was faced with relentless anger, manipulation, and guilt-tripping. In a sense, I was watching a slow-motion collapse of the family I had known for most of my life. But through all of it, I found something unexpected: freedom. The months following that fateful Thanksgiving were like a personal reckoning. I had always lived in the shadow of my family's expectations, especially my mother and Ellie. I had spent so much of my life striving to gain their approval, trying to fit into the mold they wanted for me. But the truth was, I had been invisible to them for years. My successes were ignored and my failures were magnified. In that moment when I finally stood up for myself and said, "No more," something shifted inside me. I realized that I didn't need their validation to be happy, to be successful, or to feel loved. I had been my own cheerleader for so long, and it was time to embrace the strength I had cultivated through all those years of being overlooked. It took some time, but the changes in my life were profound. I didn't just get rid of them emotionally, I had to physically distance myself from their toxicity. I moved to a new home, one with better security and, more importantly, a fresh start. I changed all my contact details, making sure I wasn't accessible to them unless I chose to be. For the first time in my life, I felt safe not just in my surroundings but in my own skin. I had been carrying the weight of my family's expectations for far too long, and now that weight was lifted. What I didn't expect was that the more I distanced myself, the more my business flourished. Without the distractions and the emotional drain of my family's constant demands, I was able to focus more on my work. My company had grown exponentially, and I found myself managing not just 1 or 2 employees, but a growing team of specialists. The reputation I had built in the high-end jewelry authentication industry was becoming well known, and we were being sought out by private collectors, estate lawyers, and museums. As my business expanded, so did my ability to invest in myself, something I had neglected for so long. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had grown from someone who felt like an afterthought in my own family to a successful entrepreneur running one of the top authentication companies in the country. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, building something meaningful from nothing, while my family continued to spin their webs of resentment and entitlement. They still believed I was just working at an antique shop, unaware of the massive empire I had quietly built behind their backs. I didn't care though. I had learned to live authentically, to be true to myself without needing anyone's approval. The silence from my parents lasted for months. I'm sure they were hoping I'd cave, that I'd come back into the fold and continue to support them as I always had. But I didn't. Instead, I focused on building a life that was meaningful to me. I invested in my business, my employees, and my personal development. I learned the importance of setting boundaries, of saying no without feeling guilty. My therapist even told me that I was finally learning how to establish healthy limits, something I had never done before. But there was one person who understood. Grandma Marie, ever the wise matriarch of the family, had been the one consistent person in my life. When my mother tried to guilt her into taking her side, Grandma Marie responded with a surprising answer: "Good for Sarah. About time someone in this family succeeded on their own terms." Her words were like a balm to my soul. For the first time, someone in my family saw me for who I really was, not as the second child who was always overshadowed by Ellie, but as someone who had worked hard to build something significant on her own. My relationship with Grandma Marie deepened during this time, and she became a source of guidance and encouragement. As for my parents, their call stopped after that. When they finally tried to contact me again, it wasn't to apologize, it was to ask for more. My father, ever the entitled one, suggested that I should help Ellie pay off her MBA loans. And my mother, who had never understood the meaning of boundaries, asked me for money to support their retirement. But by then I was done. I didn't owe them anything. I had been the one who had always given, always sacrificed, and always been invisible. No more. The funds I had been sending them each month had been a way for me to try and make peace with the family I had grown up with. But it was clear that no matter what I did, nothing would ever be enough for them. The final step in reclaiming my life was when I took legal action. I had had enough of the harassment. I issued a formal legal notice threatening to press charges for harassment if they didn't stop. That was the end of the road. My parents and Ellie eventually stopped contacting me, realizing that I was no longer the person they could manipulate into giving them what they wanted. It was bittersweet, but it also marked the beginning of my true freedom. 6 months have passed since that Thanksgiving, and for the first time in my life I feel liberated. I no longer dread Sunday dinners full of passive-aggressive remarks. I no longer have to downplay my accomplishments to spare their feelings. I am finally living for myself on my own terms. I am proud of what I've accomplished, and I am free from the toxic grip my family had on me for so many years. It's been a journey of self-discovery, of learning to set boundaries, and of embracing my worth. And I've learned that sometimes, cutting ties with those who hold you back is the only way to move forward. The key lesson from this story is the importance of self-worth and setting healthy boundaries, especially when faced with toxic relationships. Often in life, we may find ourselves giving endlessly to others, be it family, friends, or society, only to feel overlooked, unappreciated, or even taken advantage of. The story emphasizes that, at some point, we must learn to prioritize our own well-being and mental health. By setting boundaries, we protect ourselves from emotional manipulation and gain the strength to live authentically. This lesson is especially relevant as we age and experience shifts in our relationships. It's crucial to recognize that our worth is not tied to others' expectations, and it's okay to say no when our needs are being ignored. Embracing self-reliance, as shown in the story, helps us build the courage to step away from harmful dynamics and seek healthier, more fulfilling interactions. Ultimately, the story teaches us that we have the power to create our own peace, even if it means walking away from those who have never supported or valued us. In doing so, we open the door to personal growth, independence, and true happiness. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found value in this story, please leave a 1 in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and how this resonated with you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with others who might benefit from this message. And remember, your feedback means a lot. Share your feelings about the video in the comments. We appreciate you being part of our community. See you in the next video.